This is an important year for democracy because more than half of the world's population are going to vote this year in elections all over the world. Some of those elections are in autocracies or military dictatorships where we know in advance what the outcome of the elections will be. So why would we take any interest? We've taken some figures from Freedom House, which is an organization which rates countries all over the world according to an index of freedom. And so they look at individual rights and free press and free political parties and fairness of the electoral process. And the countries we're going to talk about are all pretty near the bottom of the scale when it comes to genuine freedom in their countries. We know it already that President Putin will win by probably an overwhelming majority. But the election in Russia is very important to him. It is generally believed that he wants to increase mobilization in order to continue to fight the war in Ukraine. He needs the legitimacy with the Russian people so that he can pursue the war in the way that he is currently pursuing it and persuade the Russian people that they somehow have agreed to the sacrifices that they're going to have to keep on making. It does provide some mechanism for whatever opposition voices there are in Russia to make their point. Their outlets to talk to the public are suppressed. They have ways of getting through. The way they express themselves will be of interest to those of us who are seeking to understand the sort of path that Russia is on for the next 5 to 10 years. The Russians have always been committed to holding elections. Of course, the Russians don't have the same attitude to liberal democracy as West Europeans tend to have, but they do have a commitment to the idea of democracy and the sense that legitimacy doesn't just come from the party, it comes from the popular understanding that what was the Communist Party and is now a series of basically one-party state apparatuses, that somehow is also legitimized by the man and woman on the ground. In Belarus, President Lukashenko is in exactly the same situation as President Putin. And again, the President of Belarus presiding over a deeply repressive regime where opposition leaders are jailed. But the fact that so much of the Belarusian opposition is abroad,
like Belarus is the whole prison at the moment,
will also give a voice to those opposition ideas. That this is he's regarded as the oldest, the last great dictator in Europe. At least certainly he's the oldest and he's been there the longest. Those voices will find some expression outside Belarus, but it will filter back into the Belarusian elections. The Iranian elections are probably the most consequential of all the elections that we've mentioned so far, because the Islamic Revolution is struggling with its own legitimacy in a way that we haven't seen since 1979 when the revolution took place. And so the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, and President Raisi are struggling really to hold on to a simmering pot of discontent. And in particular, young Iranian women are a source of real worry to the leadership.
Until the women of Iran are free, we are going to stand with you.
What's known as the Mahsa Amini issue became a symbol of the arbitrary brutality of this regime and the religious police. And in a way that set off a movement which has not gone away. Iran is not a small state, it's a big state with a sophisticated population, with a large economy and a very high-tech economy. People have to feel there is a process because a population that big and that potentially powerful has got to be given a sense that they have some stake in the government. The elections in Venezuela offer no curiosity as to who will win.
Nada me va a detener. Voy a seguir en las calles, voy a seguir en batalla, los voy a seguir protegiendo.
Maduro will win the election, and he wins the election in the classic way, both by suppressing the opposition.
No pueden hacer elecciones sin mí y sin los millones de venezolanos que votaron ese día.
and also changing the votes on the day. And Maduro has created as almost an electoral campaign this idea that Venezuela is entitled to take 2/3 of Guyana next door, a very small country that's indefensible. And so if Maduro seizes 2/3 of Guyana, then he gets hold of the oil. It's more oil there than in Kuwait. Suddenly, his economic chaos and mismanagement would be given a lifeline because he'd be cash rich, at least for a few years until he elected again. As and when he wins the election, he'll be able to say, look, the people elected me and my claim on Guyana is thereby stronger. We're interested in the way in which the election will be used as part of this issue of international politics. The country is wrecked. Venezuelans are fleeing to neighboring countries where they can. For the United States, this presents an area of weakness in Latin America, but it's also an area of weakness in which Russia and the Russian mercenaries can make some gains. So what the Americans fear is that Venezuela in the 2020s might be a bit like Cuba in the 1950s and 1960s, a sort of an outpost of Russian influence.
Donde llega Estados Unidos, se impone el caos.
Another reason why Maduro does want to hold the elections that he could claim are free and fair is that he wants the lifting of sanctions. And partly he's holding elections so that he can turn round to the international community, but especially the Americans, and say, look, we are dealing with our problems.
They've got till April. They need to make the right decisions here and allow opposition members to run for office and release the political prisoners that they're holding right now.
I think the Americans will be fairly hard-hearted about that. However, they will want to try to draw Venezuela back from the brink, and so will be inclined to maybe turn a blind eye to the imperfection of the election. There have been 2 military coups in Mali since 2020. As a country, it's not got very much going for it.
De la République du Mali.
All military governments know that they have to civilianize themselves to be legitimate. They can't simply stay in their military uniforms without looking illegitimate over time. So all military governments try to become more civilian, even though they keep their military grip on power. And that's one reason why elections in Mali will matter to the government.
Décide du Niger, de la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest.
And if you look across the Sahel, I mean, literally from Mali, Niger, Sudan, and Chad, all of them are suffering from military dictatorships. And so there is a sort of a huge regional civil war developing across the Sahel region, from west to east. In expelling France and getting rid of all Western influence in Mali, the military government in Mali has turned explicitly to Russia. The Russians are helping the Malians, they say, with counterinsurgency, with fighting the Islamic terrorists. The Russians are building up quite a big presence across the Sahel. One of the forms of legitimacy that most countries seem to want to go through is elections. But we know that because legitimacy differs in different parts of the world, the significance of elections differs in different parts of the world. That's why we watch them. They're interesting.